In American society, money is a taboo topic. We're taught at a young age it's improper to talk about it, but we're also bombarded with messages about the power and importance of money in our everyday lives. And by not talking about it, we miss out on the skills and lessons we need to effectively understand and financially plan. That changes today. Welcome to Money Tales. Hosted by Sandy Brager and Cami Doder, Money Tales brings more than 35 years of combined professional experience in personal finance to demystify money and demonstrate what it's like to speak openly about personal financial matters. Join us each episode as they interview modern-day movers and shakers about how money decisions intertwine with their daily lives in order to give you better insight into productive financial conversations. Subscribe today and register for our blog Fathom at aspiriant.com/podcasts to increase your money mojo. And now, here's Cami and Sandy.
Julia Cancro joins us on Money Tales this week. Years back, Julia was dining with a friend at a restaurant in New York City. Amidst bites of food, her friend shared that she started to accumulate savings, but she was unsure of what to do with the money beyond keeping it in as standard checking and savings accounts. Julia went into action, offering to point her friend toward resources that delve deeper into financial choices. In that moment, Julia became acutely aware of a gap in financial literacy. On one side of the spectrum, there's a lot of support for financial beginners, teaching fundamental skills like budgeting. On the other side, there's a plethora of resources for those diving into complex financial instruments. But what about the middle ground? For those progressing in their financial journey, but not yet advanced, there's a notable absence of guidance. Julia realized there's a chasm of financial information waiting to be addressed. This inspired her to write More Than Cash: What to Do with Your Money Now That You're Finally Making Some. More Than Cash is a short, conversational guidebook for people without a finance background who want to answer the question, what should I do with my money besides keep it in cash? It is an approachable beginner's guide to getting started with the right accounts and investments to build a financially secure and lucrative future. This is the only consolidated guidebook under 50 pages that arms you with the vocabulary and the thought process to get started on your own so you can feel confident managing your hard-earned money.
Here are 3 key money topics Julia hits on in this conversation. First, what it was like to learn how to connect with money by rolling coins into tubes as a child, then turning those tubes into dollar bills, which Julia would deposit in her savings account. Second, how she's chosen to surround herself with people who are in similar financial situations. Julia learned the importance of saying no to invitations to dinner or drinks to stay within her budget. And third, Julia's strategies for living on variable compensation, where the amount she brings in the door can vary significantly from month to month. We hope you share this episode with a friend, and please subscribe to Money Tales on your favorite podcast platform. Now on to our conversation with Julia Cancro.
Welcome to the Money Tales podcast. I'm Cami Doder.
And I'm Sandy Brager. Cami, I want to talk briefly today about food and money. Do you usually think of the two together?
Food does cost money, but tell me more.
Well, a guest shared with me a food diary article from Bon Appetit. It caught my attention because the beginning of this piece summarizes the particular person who kept the food diary and goes into a lot of detail about their finances, what they do, what their paycheck is, what their expenses are, all of that before launching into their daily food diary over the course of about a week.
How cool. I love this.
I thought, well, this is an interesting form of a money conversation. It's completely anonymous. And I think it caught my eye because this particular article that was sent to me was about a composer. Do you know how much composers make?
No, I have no clue. They're in the arts, so I assume not a crazy amount of money.
About $15,000 a concert.
Ooh, that's great.
Which was fascinating to me. So this composer made $950,000 a year. And this article is really about their food diary for a week. What I was realizing is that, and I'm going to be really honest here, as someone who tries her hardest not to judge people around money, I was really judgy when I started reading this article.
Why, Sandy? What'd you learn?
I was just sort of making assumptions and like, why should I care what this person's eating?
It felt extravagant.
I guess I just got so caught up in their salary, their expenses. I wasn't even interested in the diet part. So I got curious. I did some more research on the Bon Appetit website. It does seem like this is a normal feature for them. So I looked at some others. There is a great diversity of people who have different careers and make different amounts of money and eat different things. I got over my judgment. I read it, and it was interesting to read how into food some of these people are.
I love that a magazine that's dedicated to food is talking about money. I think that's really cool, Sandy. And I think your feelings are valid. We all have feelings, and then I appreciate you getting curious about them.
It's good to get caught on them, that's for sure. And I'll have to say, I did sort of struggle with this and ask myself, and I haven't gotten to a good conclusion, would I feel differently if this wasn't an anonymous article? If these articles actually featured the person, that'd be asking a lot of people to disclose all of their personal finances under their identity. Fascinating. And I do agree overall, good on you, Bon Appetit, for having these articles and allowing people to compare and contrast their own food and money combinations with other anonymous people that they're featuring.
Well, thanks for bringing this to our attention, because I think it's going to be fun for me to start reading these and hearing about the journeys of spending money on food. And we're talking to a guest today who lives in New York City, where food is really expensive. So maybe she's got some thoughts there. Julia Cancro, it is really great to be talking with you on the Money Tales podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here with you both.
Julia, would you introduce yourself and in doing so, provide a couple pivotal moments that have taken place in your life that really impacted who you are today?
Thank you for having me on today. Julia Cancro. I live in New York City. I'm in software sales. I've been in this role for about 5 years and have certainly seen the ups and downs of variable income in the sales world, which is probably one of the pivotal moments in money management that maybe we can talk about a little further along. But it's funny, actually, Sandy, that you brought up food and money, because one of the more interesting money conversations that I've had in recent years happened over a meal, where I think a lot of people end up having money conversations because meals are when you gather together. And I was sitting with a friend from work, and she was like, for the first time in my life, I'm starting to accumulate some savings. I don't know what to do with it besides have a checking and savings account. I said to her, I can point you in the direction of some resources of where to find information about what you can do beyond just putting your money in a regular checking and savings account that pays you no interest. And she said, great. In that process, I came to realize that there are plenty of resources for people on the early end of their money journey spectrum. You're learning how to make a budget. You're learning how to save. You're learning to live within your means. Plenty of resources there. And on the other end of the spectrum, there are plenty of resources if you want to get into some really complicated financial instruments and you want to spend a lot of time learning about various topics in the world of money. But for that middle audience who is getting a little bit more mature in their personal finance journey, but maybe not super advanced, that whole audience is mostly served by blogs. And the blogs are amazing, but they don't help you think about how different topics in the world of money interface. It's like, here's your Roth IRA or 401k. Well, how do I think about that in conjunction with my high yield savings account or my regular day-to-day checking and savings account? In order to find these blogs in the first place, you also have to know what to Google, which is for a lot of people, maybe they don't know the terms or they don't know where to start. I know this is a very long-winded answer to your question about pivotal moments in my relationship with money, but it illuminated for me that I had the benefit growing up of having a family that worked in financial services. My dad was in financial services, so we were always talking about these things on a day-to-day basis. Then I had this realization when I was in my late 20s or early 30s that not everyone has that. And so that put me on a new path for personal finance.
You grew up in a family that sounds like they were comfortable talking about money. What were those conversations about, and what were you taking away from them?
there are three different things that jump out in my childhood, like memories of learning about money or money management at various points in my childhood. So I remember being like very young and saving quarters, pennies from my chore chart or something. I'd get a quarter if I got 5 stars or something, or I lost a tooth. Tooth fairy would bring me $1 or something. And I remember rolling quarters and dimes and nickels and pennies with my dad and putting them in like the little paper tube and then bringing them to the bank and then getting cash in exchange, actual bills for the $10 worth of quarters that I had rolled, and then depositing that into the account. So it was like a very laborious process of my dad wanting me to see that all of these coins amount to something that feels like more money. Obviously, it's the same amount, but feels like a lot to you, $10 bill. And then we actually go ahead and put that in your savings account and fill out the little forms in the bank. Obviously, things are more digitized now, and there are machines that you can just dump all the coins into.
Doesn't that drive you crazy? Like all that work.
Which is a shame. It takes away these opportunities to connect with money.
Yeah, it was like a big piece of education. So that was one. I remember, I guess it kind of reframes for you that even what feels like a negligible amount of money when saved can actually amount to something substantial. And I think of that from time to time when I see like a quarter on the floor of the subway and I'm like, should I pick that up? And then I'm like, the germs are probably not worth it. It's going to cost me like thousands in medical when I contract some disease. So that's one. Another was I had an American Girl doll growing up, and I would get the catalog and I'd dog ear the pages of things that I wanted or circle for my birthday or Christmas. And there was an accessory that I wanted that my mom was like, we're not buying you that accessory for your doll.
What was it?
It was crutches or something for the doll. She's a doll. She doesn't need crutches. My mom was like, we're not buying you that for your doll. But if you really want that, you can save your money. You have a chore chart, you walk the dog or whatever. I was accumulating these orders that I was then rolling with my dad. You can save it and then you can give me the money and I'll order it for you. And I scrounged and I saved up the $20. And then by the time I had saved it, I was like, these crutches are not worth $20. This took me months to save. The lesson was very clearly learned that if you want something, you have to work hard for it. And then you can reassess whether or not that material item was worth your hard work. And I determined that, in fact, the crutches for Kirsten were not worth it.
What an important lesson in delayed gratification. What a great lesson to have given the direction the world has headed in since your youth, where everything is so instantaneous today.
I don't know if my mom intended for the lesson to be that impactful for me to be talking about it 30 years later, but here we are. And then the third thing that I would probably harken back to is for my 16th birthday, I asked for Starbucks stock. I thought Starbucks was very cool. And we had been having conversations at the dinner table about investing. My dad had said, if it's something that you want to learn a little bit about, we can talk about that. And so I had determined that some shares of Starbucks, that was the cool company. Mary Kate and Ashley had their caramel frappuccinos that they would walk around with. That was something that I thought was a big deal. I was right and wrong in my financial journey with Starbucks, where I basically bought at a high, saw the price of the stock come down, panic sold. I didn't have the brokerage account myself. So I said to my dad, this many shares, it was worth this much. And now it's worth this much. Let's sell it. And then sure enough, after, I don't know, a few months, years, whatever, it came back up. And now it is far beyond what I had originally bought it at age 16. So it was a good lesson in thinking long term and not short term, and not being a victim of the volatility of the market and reacting in a knee jerk way. And that's definitely a lesson that I have carried with me throughout my adult years of investing.
Julia, did you and your father have a conversation about selling the stock when you sold it, or it was just your decision, you went for it?
No, we definitely talked about it, and it wasn't a large amount of shares. So I think he was willing to let me learn the lesson. Maybe the company was crashing and he was like, yeah, sure, if she wants to take the money off the table, fine. But
another good lesson, though.
Yeah, we definitely talked about it. And we continue to talk about it as, wow, should have held it.
Coulda, woulda, shouldas. Wow, Julia, what amazing lessons as a young person. I'm curious, with all those great foundations to personal finance, what role did money play as you were starting your career?
I had this belief when I was in college, and maybe still have this belief, that if you do something that you are passionate about for work and you can therefore really excel at it, the money will follow. I joke from time to time that I wish someone had told me when I was in college that the career I started on, which is not exactly the same industry I'm in now, I wish someone had said, there's not really that much money there.
You had to learn it the hard way.
Would that have changed your choice? Because you talked about passion. I'm curious, how do you reconcile passion with the need for money?
I don't know that it would have changed my choice. It probably would have just made me resent the person who gave me that advice, especially when I found out a few years later that they were right. And I still believe that, like, if you want to reach top levels of any particular field, you have to be really passionate about it. And the top levels are where the most money is made. But I think I was maybe a little bit naive in my belief of how quickly those top levels could be reached and how many years of living on a tight budget I would have to endure.
You're figuring out that your first choice wasn't very lucrative. So then you move over to presumably where you are today as a salesperson.
So I didn't actually move into the technology industry on purpose. I was at a small retail startup. This was not my first job out of college. My second job out of college was a really small startup, and they ended up going out of business, ran out of funding, probably a fairly typical startup story. And so I needed a job, and I was like, oh, I guess I have to broaden my horizons beyond this retail world that I'm in, and ultimately made my way to a retail analytics software that I had been a user of. So I bridged from industry to tech that supports the industry. And I've seen friends do that from education, going from being in the classroom to working at an ed tech company, or there's a lot of technology that supports various industries. And if you're trying to get out of that industry, going to a technology company that supports your industry is a pretty common move.
Yeah, a great way to leverage skills and experience. Have you always lived in New York post-college?
I have.
What influence has that had on your personal financial life?
Well, New York is very expensive. So I had to learn early on when to say no to things. No, I'm not, I won't join you guys for dinner, but I'll meet you after for a drink. One thing that's really important in New York is having friends who are kind of the same mindset as you in terms of spending and saving. And there were plenty of opportunities that I could have said yes to, but I wanted to save a little more that month. And I'm talking like early years in New York where you're like really exploring the city. People want to do fun things, but it was really important to me that I had two roommates and they were both like, yeah, sure. We were all in the same stage together. And I think people get into trouble when they are living beyond their means because they're trying to keep up with peers or family members or whatever who are at a different point in their financial journey.
Oh, it's so hard. I've lived in New York for short periods of time. I made the conscious decision that I wasn't trying to save. We used to have a joke, my brother and I, that you would just open your wallet and say, take whatever it costs. Like it just money was flying out. It felt like.
It feels like when I walk out of my apartment door, it's going to cost me $100 no matter what. I think when I first moved to New York, it was very eye-opening. I was looking around, I was like, this is not a fair cross section of the country or of the world. Everyone looks so well dressed. Everyone's so fashionable. Everyone's so good looking. It was a hard adjustment to realize that you didn't have to like compete or keep up with that at every step of the way because it would be impossible. But I think a lot of people arrive and they're like, all right, I've got to be that. And then they start spending in order to participate in a certain type of lifestyle. And that's when you can incur a lot of credit card debt.
Yeah, you got to watch it. I know from my own experience living in that city that every rung of the economic ladder is represented throughout the city. So you could see the big spenders and also people who had no financial resources whatsoever. Finding your place in that and what's most important to you, I think is really important. But that rent cost, or for people who buy homes there, mortgage costs and housing costs can be a hard hurdle to overcome.
It can be very humbling. You might feel like you're doing well, and then you pass by an apartment that has the lights on at night and you look in and you're like, I can't even scratch the surface of that world.
It is interesting. I like what you're saying about finding a tribe that has the same values as you, and that helps things for sure. So you're living in New York, you're hopping from one industry to the next, you make your way into technology sales, and you mentioned that there is a fluctuation of income that comes with that role. Tell us about getting used to that and how you've maneuvered and used your financial skills and getting yourself prepared for that remarkable conversation you had with your friend over a meal.
It is very variable income in a sales commission role, not just in technology sales, but any type of sales, depending on what your pay structure is like. But often there's a component of base salary and then a component of commission. Depending on what the expected breakdown of that is, your base salary might be fairly low, and your commission is really what supports a more luxurious lifestyle. But of course, the commission is not guaranteed. That's variable and based on, of course, your own performance. But the economy and the businesses that you sell to, you're relying on them spending money to make your own money. So that's a risk, and it's a lifestyle adjustment and something that you have to be mentally prepared for that risk. And if I had 4 children and a mortgage, I'm not sure that I'd be in this exact role that I'm in, because it's just too stressful to not know what your income is going to be for the year and therefore what you can do or spend on a day-to-day basis. So the way that I try to manage that in my own life as a single person with no children, I joke, I don't even have a dog. I have no responsibilities really besides my rent.
But it costs $100 at least every time you leave your apartment.
It's true. So there are a few things that I do to manage that. One is really trying to live within the confines of my worst month on a day-to-day basis. My rent is not out of control. My spending habits are not out of control. You hear people talk about pay yourself first. Automatically route part of your paycheck to your 401k, to a high yield savings account, making sure that I am automatically saving so that then anything that hits my checking account from my paycheck is there to support rent and regular spending, like disposable income. By living below your means or within the confines of your worst month, that means if you are having a really good month or you get a bonus check, then chances are you don't really need that money for day-to-day expenses because you've set your life up that you can live with a smaller amount of income. And then you can put that bonus check or commission check into savings to save for a scenario where maybe you do decide to take a step up in your lifestyle and you want to spend a little bit more on rent, or you buy a place, you have a mortgage, and you have these more reliable, higher expenses, then you have a nest egg to support that. In the early years, it's definitely a hard adjustment as you're starting to accumulate some savings. And that's exactly the point that I got to with my friend, where she was living within her means of her base salary. And then some commission checks started rolling in. She's like, this is great. I don't need these for a day-to-day basis. What a blessing to not need that, to have extra cash. What do I do with it to set myself up for financial success?
I love this, Julia. A lot of times these conversations would be about how do I spend it? I really love this conversation was about setting ourselves up for financial success. You also talked about the chasm, I'm calling it a chasm, of financial education. One end of the spectrum, chasm, is being basic financial literacy. And then the other end is just really technical, strategic, I'm going to hedge my whatever. You've helped people with bridging this chasm. We would share more about this.
Definitely. Sometimes I think if we're thinking about the chasm, the people who are on one bank don't really want to go to the other bank. They don't care about these complicated financial tools. They're happy being in the more basic spot if those are the only two choices. But wouldn't someone rather be a little bit more knowledgeable? Because I think money can be an intimidating conversation. And I joke with friends sometimes that when you're in a scenario and people start talking about money, they all start talking like this. And they get this like a weird voice because everyone's suddenly uncomfortable and you don't want to go any further. So you give short answers, put up a front a little bit. If the only two options are like very basic or very complicated, most people are probably going to stay on the very basic side. I think what I'd love to see more of, and I think a lot of people would love this, is how do you just educate yourself a little bit more so that you feel comfortable having the conversation? You feel like you understand your own financial future, and that can be enough. You don't need to be talking about derivatives and options and anything else. That was my conversation with my friend Lane at dinner of let me help you find some resources. Ultimately discovered that those resources were very hard to aggregate. So I started a Google Doc for her and I said, here are like 5 different account types, how you can think about them. I'm not a financial advisor, so this is not advice. This is just some mental scaffolding for you so that you now know which paths to go down, things you want to learn more about. And that was the very beginning of what became a short book, More Than Cash, so that my friend could figure out how to advance herself on her personal financial journey without needing to go really deep into some of the complicated topics. I think there are a lot of people who have questions or like musings and don't really know who to ask because most people don't learn about personal finance, which is a failing of the education system. It's not a failing of the home environment because how could a parent teach it if the parent doesn't know? When would the parent have learned if their job is not related to it? I was on the subway the other day and I heard probably like a 20 something, maybe late teens, college age or just after, saying to her friend, when do I use a debit card versus a credit card?
Great question. I love it.
How do I know when to do that? How would she know what the benefits of each are?
So did you jump into the conversation, Julia?
I would have, but they were getting off the train and it wasn't my stop. So I had to keep riding. But I thought like, if I had that question and my parents weren't my parents, who would I ask? Where would I go? I'd Google it probably. And then you get ads from credit card companies that are telling you that you should sign up for their credit card and all the benefits.
Julia, you wrote this book because of the conversation you had with your friend. Did that conversation spark more money conversations with you and other friends?
Yes, definitely. I said, I'll do some research for you. The things I'm looking for don't exist. I'll just aggregate it for you. She read through it and then said, this is so great. I have a bunch of questions. Okay, so we started another conversation. Okay, that was so helpful. Can I share this with my friend Katie? Can I share this with my friend Sasha? Can you come to my apartment and talk to some other people about this? It snowballed a little bit and people had a lot of great questions. And it was nice to have an environment where there was no discomfort about the conversation. And that's definitely something that I've learned from my parents. When I would ask a question about something that I was like, oh, is this a dumb question? They wouldn't say like, can't believe you don't know that. They'd say, no, that's a really good question for these reasons. Then we'd have a conversation about the answer. But I find sometimes you ask someone a question and they say, wow, you really don't know that? Now I feel silly and I don't want to ask you more questions. So I think a lot of financial education is about creating an environment where people feel comfortable asking questions. But I think the reason that that environment doesn't exist so readily in the financial world is that a lot of people don't know the answers. So they respond with, wow, I can't believe you don't know that because they don't want the conversation to go any further because they don't want to reveal that they actually don't know. And I observed this in a lot of friends who've gotten married or are in serious relationships where they're starting to share finances. And you start to realize that one partner is taking the reins financially, and that partner doesn't actually know that much. So you have two people stumbling in the darkness together, but one of them believes the other knows the way. And that's scary to me.
The loudest voice can win in those situations. I don't mean screaming voice, but the more confident, the more powerful, the more, I got this.
We often talk about the importance of financial literacy, but also creating that space for engagement. Because if you're not willing to engage with your personal finances, knowing more about how they work doesn't really matter because you're not going to take advantage of your knowledge. So those two go hand in hand.
For people who are not comfortable with their personal finances, or if they would hire a financial advisor, that's amazing. Totally would encourage that. But won't you get so much more out of that relationship if you know a little bit more about your own financial foundations? You can ask better questions. You can have a better conversation rather than just blindly turning over the reins to someone else.
Yeah. And the other thing we talk about, Julia, is if you are hiring the advisor because you're trying to get educated and that's more your approach, hire someone who is super passionate about educating and loves the question, I don't understand. It keeps coming back. So finding that professional, if you do go that route, who is your partner is really important.
Julia, now that you've written this book, More Than Cash, how's that shifted your own relationship with money?
When I started the process of publishing the book, I was on this track of the publishing and I lost sight of what the book would mean to people and that it would actually be very gratifying. And to have someone come up to me or DM me on Instagram and say like, wow, this was so helpful. I feel so much better prepared to manage my own finances. I did not at all anticipate how gratifying that would feel and so rewarding. I lost sight of it because I was just on the to-do list of these edits, this cover design. I just kind of forgot what the big picture was, lost the forest through the trees. So yeah, it feels very rewarding.
Congratulations to you. And it sounds like you've really created a resource that can help people find their way. So listeners, be sure to check out Julia's book. And Julia, tell us, what's your next money conversation going to be and who's it going to be with?
I'm dating someone, and as you get more serious into a relationship with someone, you have to start talking about those things. Isn't that the number one cause of divorce in America is disputes about money? I think if you are not able to talk about those things really comfortably and being transparent and making sure you're both on the same page about how you approach finances and what your perspective on saving versus spending is and the life you want one day, those are really important and difficult conversations.
Oh, Julia, that's such an important conversation. And I'm really glad you're going to have it with the person you're dating.
I hope he's not listening. He's going to freak out.
He'll be ready.
You'll ease into it and have it at a really comfortable, curious way. And congratulations, as Sandy said, on More Than Cash. And may that project and passion continue. Thanks for joining us on the Money Tales podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It was a great conversation.
Thanks for listening to the Money Tales podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, share it with someone you think would benefit from listening. And leave us a review on your favorite podcasting platform. Your ratings and reviews help more people find our podcast. If you're inspired to gain clarity and peace of mind about financial matters, don't hesitate to reach out to our team at Aspirient. Go to aspirient.com/start a dialogue. Or you can email Sandy and me at podcasts@aspirient.com. See you next time.